The most dangerous monsters are often the ones we never bother to understand. The morning air carried the sharp scent of ionized rain across Meridian Station as thousands of commuters poured through the massive transit plaza beneath a ceiling of transparent alloy that revealed the endless sea of stars beyond. Cargo drones hummed overhead in disciplined formations. Arrival chimes echoed every few seconds in half a dozen languages. Steam drifted from food carts where vendors served hot coffee and fresh bread to workers beginning another ordinary day at the edge of explored space. Life moved with practiced precision. Schedules mattered. Deliveries mattered. Deadlines mattered. Only one thing seemed frozen in time. At the center of the plaza stood a cylindrical containment field nearly 12 feet tall, its pale blue energy surface shimmering softly beneath the station lights. No warning sirens surrounded it. No armed guards stood nearby. No emergency barriers blocked the sidewalks. People simply walked around it without slowing down, as naturally as water flowing around a stone in a river. Parents quietly guided their children to the opposite side of the walkway. Delivery crews lowered their voices as they passed. Even tourists stopped taking pictures when their eyes landed on the figure inside. She stood perfectly still, a young alien woman with smooth blue skin that reflected the cold station lights like polished glass. Long silver hair rested across her shoulders, untouched by the faint electrical breeze created by the field surrounding her. Her violet eyes remained fixed on the distant docking bays beyond the crowd, as though she had forgotten what it felt like to expect anyone to look back. She wore a simple gray jacket and dark utility trousers without a single emblem identifying who she was. No chains restrained her wrists. No visible locks held her in place. Yet nobody questioned why she remained there. Above the containment field, a digital display glowed in calm white letters. Restricted subject. Do not approach. Report any unauthorized contact. There was no explanation beneath the warning. Apparently no one needed one anymore. Rumors had replaced facts years ago. Some whispered she could hear thoughts. Others claimed entire settlements had vanished after looking into her eyes. A few insisted she had once destroyed a military outpost without touching a single machine. Every story became larger each time it was repeated. Every version made people walk a little faster. None of them noticed that the young woman never spoke, never reached toward anyone, never even asked to leave. The station clock rolled past 8:15 a.m. A maintenance robot paused beside the containment field just long enough to scan its power output before continuing on its assigned route. It never acknowledged the person standing inside. Neither did anyone else. Across the crowded concourse, sunlight from the nearby gas giant reflected through the station windows, painting soft bands of gold across the polished floor. For just a moment, the warm light reached the alien woman's face. She closed her eyes as though trying to remember something almost lost. Then the light faded. The crowd continued moving. Conversations rose and fell. Somewhere a child laughed before being hurried away by nervous parents. The young woman slowly opened her eyes again. Whatever hope had flickered there disappeared as quickly as the sunlight had. Around her, an entire civilization had learned the same lesson. Fear required no evidence once it became a habit. Ethan Carter adjusted the worn strap of his tool case as the station map flickered across the small display on his wrist. Docking Bay 21. Replace a damaged plasma regulator. Collect payment. Catch the evening cargo shuttle before the next freight cycle. It should have been another ordinary maintenance job. One more line on a schedule that rarely left room for surprises. The cool recycled air carried the faint smell of machine oil and fresh coffee as he followed the steady flow of commuters through Meridian Station. His brown work jacket showed years of careful repairs. His boots bore the white scuffs of countless cargo decks. He had never cared much about appearances. Machines responded to patience, not polished shoes. People often did too. A service drone floated beside him before projecting a detour notice into the air. Commercial traffic had been redirected through the central plaza because of ongoing maintenance near the eastern transit corridor. Ethan sighed quietly. Of course it has. He changed direction without complaint and continued walking with hundreds of strangers moving toward the station's busiest intersection. Long before he reached the plaza, he noticed something unusual. The conversations around him became softer. Footsteps unconsciously shifted farther apart. Children stopped pointing at storefront displays and instead stared ahead with wide eyes until their parents gently turned their heads away. Nobody needed signs to tell them where to walk. Fear had already drawn invisible lines across the polished floor. Ethan rounded the final corner and saw the containment field standing beneath the immense glass ceiling. He slowed naturally, not because he recognized the woman inside, but because everyone else seemed determined not to. The blue energy barrier emitted a quiet electrical hum that blended with the distant engines arriving every few minutes. Inside stood the same young alien woman, exactly where she had been when the morning commuters passed. She had not moved more than a few inches. Her silver hair rested neatly against her shoulders. Her posture remained calm despite the thousands of curious glances that never lasted more than a second. Ethan looked up at the warning display suspended above the field. Restricted subject. Do not approach. Report any unauthorized contact. He frowned slightly. There was still no explanation. Just an order. An elderly maintenance worker pushing a cleaning cart noticed Ethan reading the sign. The older man lowered his voice before speaking. First day seeing her? Ethan nodded once. What happened? The worker immediately shook his head. Does not matter. Just keep walking. You do not know? Ethan asked. I know enough. The worker resumed, pushing his cart. Everybody does. Ethan watched him disappear into the crowd before returning his attention to the young woman. Something felt strangely incomplete. Every warning he had ever respected included reasons, procedures, measurements, or evidence. This one offered nothing except fear. The alien woman slowly lifted her eyes. They passed across the moving crowd without stopping on anyone. Then, for the briefest moment, they met Ethan's. There was no anger, no threat, no plea for help, only quiet exhaustion. As if she had grown used to becoming part of the station's architecture, another object people noticed only long enough to avoid. Around him, hundreds of travelers continued hurrying toward trains, shops, and departure gates. Ethan remained where he was. For reasons he could not yet explain, the warning display above the field no longer seemed like the most important thing in front of him. The station clock advanced another 3 minutes, yet Ethan still had not taken a single step toward docking bay 21. His wrist communicator vibrated softly beneath the sleeve of his jacket. Job reminder. Maintenance window begins in 40 minutes. He silenced the notification without looking away from the containment field. Something about the entire scene continued to resist common sense. Dangerous equipment always came with technical reports. Hazardous materials always carried specifications. Even damaged cargo containers displayed inspection histories. Yet a living person stood behind a wall of shimmering energy with nothing except a warning that asked questions instead of answering them. Footsteps echoed across the polished floor as another maintenance supervisor passed nearby, carrying a stack of diagnostic tablets. He noticed Ethan standing still and followed his gaze. The older man sighed before speaking. Do yourself a favor, son. Ethan turned slightly. What kind of favor? Forget she exists. Ethan looked back toward the field. That seems difficult when she is standing in the middle of the station. Exactly. The supervisor adjusted the collar of his gray uniform. She has been here for months. At first, everybody wanted answers. Eventually, people stopped asking. Why? The man offered a tired smile. Because fear is easier than curiosity. Before Ethan could respond, the supervisor continued walking, disappearing into the moving crowd without another word. The answer lingered longer than the conversation itself. Fear is easier than curiosity. Ethan quietly repeated the sentence in his mind. It explained the crowd. It did not explain the woman. A pair of teenagers hurried past the containment field, laughing until one accidentally looked toward the blue barrier. His smile vanished instantly. He grabbed his friend's sleeve and pulled him away without saying why. Neither of them had actually seen the alien woman do anything. The warning alone had been enough. Ethan studied her more carefully now. Her posture remained relaxed. Her breathing was slow and steady. She occasionally shifted her weight from one foot to the other, but every movement appeared natural, almost graceful. She was not pacing. She was not testing the barrier. She was simply standing there while the station continued living around her. Then he noticed something unexpected. A small cleaning robot rolled toward the containment field, following the programmed route that polished the plaza every morning. As it reached the edge of the blue energy barrier, it briefly stopped. One of its tiny mechanical brushes became trapped beneath a loose floor panel. The machine emitted a quiet series of electronic tones while attempting to free itself. Hundreds of people walked past without noticing. The alien woman did. She slowly knelt inside the field, carefully reached toward the barrier, and placed one blue hand against the transparent energy surface directly opposite the struggling robot. She could not touch it. She could not help it. Yet she remained there, watching the little machine continue trying to free itself. After several seconds, the brush slipped loose. The robot resumed its route, as if nothing had happened. The young woman quietly stood again. Ethan frowned. It was such a small moment that no one else seemed to notice. No one except him. Someone who wished harm would not have paused for a machine that barely reached her knees. It was an insignificant detail, almost invisible, but sometimes the smallest details revealed the largest truths. For the first time since arriving at Meridian Station, Ethan found himself wondering whether the warning above her had been hiding something far more ordinary than a monster. Ethan glanced once more at the time glowing across his wrist communicator before quietly dismissing another reminder from Docking Bay 21. The maintenance contract would survive a delay of a few minutes. Whatever was happening in front of him felt far more difficult to ignore. The crowd continued flowing around the containment field with almost mechanical precision. Business executives hurried toward departure gates. Freight crews pushed loaded carts across polished flooring. Travelers studied navigation displays while avoiding even the briefest glance toward the young woman surrounded by blue light. It reminded Ethan of people refusing to look through the window of an abandoned house. Nobody wanted to know whether the stories were true. They only wanted to stay far enough away that they never had to find out. A small refreshment kiosk stood less than 30 feet from the containment field. Fresh coffee filled the air with its warm roasted aroma, while display ovens kept pastries glowing beneath soft amber lights. Ethan stepped into line without fully deciding why. The young cashier smiled politely. "What can I get for you today?" Ethan studied the menu for only a moment. 1 bottle of water, 1 vegetable sandwich, 1 apple. The cashier gathered the order into a simple insulated bag. "Long workday." Ethan smiled faintly. "Looks that way." Minutes later, he returned to the edge of the containment field carrying the small paper bag in one hand. Several nearby pedestrians immediately slowed. A security camera mounted high above quietly rotated toward his position. Nobody intervened. They simply watched. Ethan crouched near the transparent blue barrier, leaving several feet of respectful distance between himself and the young woman. She noticed him almost immediately. Her violet eyes shifted from the station ceiling to the bag resting beside his boots. Neither of them spoke for several seconds. The hum of the containment field filled the silence between them. Finally, Ethan placed the bag gently on the floor directly beside the barrier. "I do not know if they allow deliveries," he said with a calm smile. "But I figured it was worth trying." The young woman looked at the bag without moving. Then she looked back at him. "Why?" Her voice was quiet, clear, and unexpectedly gentle. It carried none of the menace the warning display had promised. Ethan shrugged. "Because lunchtime eventually finds everyone." She remained perfectly still. "You should leave. That seems to be popular advice today." "It is good advice." "Maybe." Ethan rested one arm across his knee. "But nobody has explained why." She lowered her gaze toward the polished floor. "Some questions make life simpler when they remain unanswered." Ethan considered that for a moment before answering. "I have spent 20 years fixing machines. Every expensive mistake I have ever seen started because someone stopped asking questions." For the first time, the corner of her mouth moved almost imperceptibly. Not quite a smile. More like the memory of one. It disappeared so quickly Ethan almost believed he had imagined it. A station attendant wearing a dark blue uniform approached from across the plaza before stopping several feet away. "Sir," she called carefully, "station policy recommends maintaining your distance." Ethan nodded politely without standing. "I am maintaining it." She hesitated. Technically, he was correct. He had not crossed the safety markers surrounding the containment field. He had broken no regulation. After an uncertain pause, the attendant quietly walked away. Ethan looked back toward the young woman. The paper bag still rested untouched beside the glowing barrier. "I never asked your name," he said softly. Her eyes met his once again. This time they held something different. Not fear, not suspicion, only surprise that someone had considered asking at all. The question remained suspended between them while the sounds of Meridian Station continued without interruption. Cargo lifts rumbled through distant corridors. Departure announcements echoed softly beneath the immense glass ceiling. Somewhere nearby, fresh bread slid from an automated oven, filling the air with a warm aroma that contrasted sharply with the cool metallic scent surrounding the containment field. The young woman did not answer immediately. Instead, she looked at the paper bag resting beside the glowing barrier, then back at Ethan as though trying to understand a language she had not heard in a very long time. "Names are dangerous," she said at last. Her voice remained calm, almost musical, yet it carried the quiet weight of experience rather than fear. Ethan nodded slowly. "Sometimes." He leaned back slightly, resting both hands on his knees. "But they are also how people stop being strangers." She lowered her eyes for a moment. Around them, travelers continued passing by without slowing down. A businessman glanced toward Ethan, shook his head almost imperceptibly, and disappeared into the crowd. Two station officers exchanged quiet words while watching from across the plaza, but neither approached. The invisible distance everyone maintained around the containment field remained perfectly intact. "You should not spend your afternoon here," the young woman said softly. "You have work." Ethan smiled. "You notice my tool case?" She gave the smallest nod. "And the maintenance badge on your jacket." He laughed quietly. "I guess I am easier to read than I thought." For just an instant, the corners of her lips lifted into a genuine smile. It was brief enough that anyone walking past would have missed it completely. Ethan did not. The expression transformed her face more than he expected. Whatever stories the station had built around her, they had never mentioned that she could smile. "There it is," he said gently. Her expression faded back into caution. "What? Proof that you are still capable of surprising people." She looked away toward the endless stream of travelers. That has never ended well. Silence settled comfortably between them. Ethan had learned years ago that broken machines often revealed their problems after the noise stopped. Perhaps people worked the same way. Several long seconds passed before she spoke again. "My name is Lyra." Ethan repeated it quietly, almost respectfully. "Lyra." She looked at him with visible surprise. "You did not ask where I come from." "Not yet." "You did not ask what I supposedly did." "No." "Why?" Ethan thought about the answer before giving it. "Because I have met too many people who were introduced by their worst rumor instead of their real story." Lyra studied him carefully, as though measuring every word against years of disappointment. The blue light from the containment field reflected gently across her silver hair. "Most people ask the frightening questions first," she whispered. "I already know people are frightened," Ethan replied. "I was more interested in learning your name." Her eyes remained fixed on him, and something inside them seemed to soften. Not trust. Not yet. But perhaps the first small crack in a wall built over many lonely months. She glanced once more toward the untouched paper bag beside the barrier. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Not for the food." Ethan tilted his head slightly. "Then for what?" Lyra looked across the crowded station, where thousands of strangers continued walking without ever truly seeing her. When she answered, her voice was almost lost beneath the distant hum of arriving ships. "For speaking to me like I still belong in the same world as everyone else." The words lingered between them long after Lyra finished speaking. Ethan looked beyond the containment field toward the endless movement of Meridian Station, watching thousands of people pass within a few yards of someone they had already decided not to see. The afternoon lighting shifted as a transport vessel crossed above the station's transparent ceiling, washing the plaza in pale silver before fading back to its usual cool blue. His wrist communicator vibrated again. "Job status update. Client requests estimated arrival." Ethan dismissed the message with a quiet tap and slipped the communicator back beneath his sleeve. "You are going to lose a customer," Lyra said gently. "Probably. You should not do that because of me." Ethan smiled. "I have lost customers for much stranger reasons." She lowered her eyes, but this time the silence between them felt different. It no longer carried the heavy distance of strangers. It felt more like two people trying to understand a puzzle that neither of them had solved yet. A low mechanical tone echoed across the plaza as a station service vehicle approached the containment field. Two technicians stepped out wearing dark maintenance uniforms marked with the authority seal. One carried a diagnostic tablet, while the other inspected a control panel built into the floor beside the shimmering barrier. Ethan watched with professional curiosity. Maintenance work always attracted his attention. The older technician connected a cable to the panel and frowned almost immediately. Energy draw is climbing again, he muttered. It should not be this high. His partner glanced toward Lyra before lowering his voice. Just stabilize it and file the report. You ever wonder why? The older man asked. The younger technician stiffened. Wonder why what? Why this field needs so much power? No. His answer came too quickly. We maintain it. We do not question it. Ethan quietly listened while pretending to study the polished floor beneath his boots. The exchange lasted only seconds before the technicians disconnected their equipment and walked away without looking at Lyra once. Something about the conversation settled uneasily in his mind. Containment fields usually prevented something from escaping. Yet the technician had spoken about increasing energy draw, as though the system itself struggled to keep functioning. Ethan shifted his attention toward the barrier. Thin streams of pale blue light flowed through its surface in slow, rhythmic patterns. Years spent repairing industrial shielding systems had trained his eyes to notice details most people ignored. He frowned. The energy distribution looked unusual. Instead of pushing inward toward the center, portions of the field appeared to be flowing outward, away from Lyra. Very subtly, almost imperceptibly. He stood and slowly walked a few steps around the circular barrier, studying the faint distortions from different angles. Lyra watched him with quiet curiosity. What are you looking at? She asked. Ethan did not answer immediately. His eyes remained fixed on the shifting currents inside the transparent wall. Something that does not make sense. Most things here do not. He slowly shook his head. No, this is different. He stepped closer to the outer edge, careful to remain behind every safety marker. I have repaired containment systems for cargo reactors, unstable minerals, and experimental engines. His expression grew thoughtful. They all move energy toward whatever they are holding. Lyra's face became noticeably still. And this one? She asked softly. Ethan kept watching the faint streams of blue light ripple across the barrier. This one looks like it is spending just as much effort keeping something from reaching you as it is keeping you from reaching everyone else. For the first time since they had met, genuine surprise appeared in Lyra's violet eyes. She looked at the barrier, then back at Ethan, as though he had just noticed something that nobody else had thought to see. Lyra did not answer immediately. The station seemed to grow quieter around the two of them, although the crowds never stopped moving. Freight shuttles continued arriving every few minutes. Information screens refreshed with new departure schedules. Somewhere above them, docking clamps locked onto another transport with a deep metallic echo that rolled through the immense structure like distant thunder. Yet inside the circle surrounding the containment field, everything felt strangely still. Lyra slowly walked toward the section of the barrier Ethan had been studying. She rested her fingertips a few inches from the shimmering blue surface without making contact. The light flowing through it reflected softly across her face. Nobody has ever said that before, she whispered. Ethan folded his arms. Because nobody looked? She gave a faint nod. Most people only ask what the field is keeping away from them. Her violet eyes followed the moving currents inside the barrier. You asked what it might be protecting. Ethan looked at the flowing energy once again. The pattern continued repeating every few seconds, almost like a heartbeat. As he watched, another subtle fluctuation crossed the surface. It spread outward from Lyra before disappearing into the outer layers of the containment system. His instincts as an engineer refused to ignore it. That pulse started from your position, he said quietly. No, Lyra replied. It ended there. Ethan frowned. The distinction mattered. Before he could ask another question, every light surrounding the containment field dimmed for less than a second. The interruption was so brief that most travelers never noticed. Ethan did. So did Lyra. A low warning tone sounded beneath the plaza floor. Barely audible. Then it disappeared. Across the station, maintenance crews immediately began speaking into communicators while small inspection drones launched from recessed ceiling compartments. Lyra closed her eyes for a moment. She looked tired rather than frightened. It is happening again, she murmured. What is? Ethan asked. She opened her eyes slowly. The field is becoming unstable. Ethan instinctively stepped closer to the outer safety line. How often? More frequently now. Has anyone tried repairing it? A quiet, almost sorrowful smile crossed her face. They believe the field is perfect. Ethan glanced toward the technicians who had already begun checking nearby control panels. None of them looked at Lyra. They only looked at numbers on their screens. That bothered him more than he expected. Machines always produce data. People produce context. Ignoring either one usually led to the wrong conclusion. Another faint ripple traveled through the barrier. This time, Ethan noticed something else. Every nearby electronic display flickered at exactly the same moment before returning to normal. Even his wrist communicator briefly lost its signal. He looked down at the screen, then back at the barrier. That was synchronized, he said. The field affected the station grid. Lyra lowered her voice even further. It always does. Ethan met her eyes. Then why are they only monitoring the field? She held his gaze for several long seconds before answering. Because they are afraid of what they might discover if they started monitoring me instead. The words settled heavily between them. Ethan looked again at the containment system, then at the untouched lunch still resting beside the glowing barrier. An unsettling thought slowly formed in his mind. If the station had spent months measuring electricity, power output, and structural stability, perhaps nobody had ever bothered measuring the person standing quietly at the center of it all. And if everyone had been asking the wrong question from the beginning, then the greatest mystery inside Meridian Station might never have been the field at all. For several moments, neither of them spoke. The faint hum of the containment field blended with the distant rhythm of arriving freighters until it became part of the station itself, another sound people had learned to ignore. Ethan rested one hand against his tool case while studying the blue currents flowing through the transparent barrier. The more he observed them, the less they resembled a prison. They behaved like an active filtration system, constantly pulling invisible disturbances away from the woman standing at its center. Another soft fluctuation rippled across the field. This time, several decorative lights along the plaza dimmed for less than a heartbeat before returning to normal brightness. Travelers barely noticed. A little girl walking with her father looked up at the flickering lights, then smiled when they returned. She never realized how close she had been to the source of the disturbance. Lyra quietly watched the child disappear into the crowd. "She reminds me of my sister," she whispered. Ethan turned toward her. "You have a sister?" Lyra nodded. "Had. She lives very far away now." Her answer carried no bitterness, only distance. Ethan sensed there was more to the story, but he had already learned that trust grew slowly. He waited. Eventually, she continued. "When I was young, my people believed my condition was a gift." She looked toward the glowing energy surrounding her. Later, they called it a responsibility. Finally, they called it a threat. Ethan frowned slightly. "Your condition?" Lyra lifted one hand toward the barrier again. Tiny streams of pale light drifted across the transparent surface as though responding to her presence. "My nervous system reacts to unstable quantum resonance. Most species never notice it. I always do." Ethan listened carefully. "The station is filled with reactors, jump drives, communication arrays, and shield generators," she continued. "Each one releases microscopic disturbances into space. Alone they are harmless. Together they become noise." She searched for the right human word before softly adding, "Pressure." Ethan slowly nodded. The explanation fit everything he had seen. "And the field?" Lyra looked directly into his eyes. "It absorbs the pressure before it reaches me." He looked back toward the shimmering wall. "Not because you create it. No, because you feel it." She gave a single quiet nod. Without the field, every fluctuation inside the station arrives at once. Every overloaded circuit, every unstable reactor, every shield imbalance. I hear them all. Ethan imagined standing in the middle of 1,000 alarms ringing at the same time, every second of every day. The thought alone felt exhausting. Lyra offered a faint smile that never quite reached her eyes. "People heard that electronic systems behaved strangely around me. They assumed I was causing the failures." She looked across the crowded plaza where commuters continued hurrying toward trains and docking gates. "Nobody considered that I was the first one to notice problems that already existed." Ethan exhaled slowly. The realization settled over him with unexpected weight. Entire stories had been built from incomplete observations. Machines flickered. Lights dimmed. Systems fluctuated. Everyone blamed the one person standing nearby, instead of asking why those events always happened before larger equipment failures were discovered. A soft chime echoed through the station. Moments later, a maintenance announcement appeared across dozens of public displays. Reactor stabilization complete. Local power grid returned to normal operation. Ethan glanced at the message, then back at Lyra. She had already relaxed, almost imperceptibly. The faint tension in her shoulders disappeared. Her breathing became easier. He understood immediately. She had sensed the repair before the station had announced it. And for the first time that day, Ethan realized the galaxy had not imprisoned a monster inside the containment field. It had quietly isolated the only person who had been listening to problems everyone else was too busy to hear. Evening settled gently over Meridian Station as the endless river of travelers slowly thinned into quieter streams. Warm amber lights replaced the bright daylight panels above the plaza, casting long reflections across the polished floor. The containment field continued its steady blue glow, almost peaceful now that Ethan understood what he had been looking at all afternoon. The barrier was never simply a prison. It was a shield built around someone who had spent years carrying a burden nobody had cared enough to understand. A group of senior station engineers entered the plaza accompanied by maintenance supervisors and several officials from the authority. They moved directly toward the control console beside the containment field, speaking quietly while reviewing fresh diagnostic reports. Ethan noticed something different this time. Their expressions no longer carried certainty. One of the engineers repeatedly compared the reactor stabilization logs with the fluctuations he had personally witnessed around Lyra. Another technician replayed recordings from the station sensors, pausing each time the energy patterns aligned with system failures that had occurred hours later. The numbers were beginning to tell a different story. One of the officials finally looked toward Ethan. "You are the maintenance contractor who reported the abnormal energy direction?" Ethan nodded once. "I only reported what I observed." The official glanced toward the barrier before quietly answering. "Sometimes observation is more valuable than assumption." It was the first honest sentence Ethan had heard from anyone wearing an authority uniform that day. Several technicians carefully adjusted the control interface. The blue field shimmered once before becoming noticeably softer. It did not disappear. It simply relaxed, like a machine no longer forced to compensate for an incorrect design. Lyra closed her eyes for a brief moment and took a slow, comfortable breath. Ethan noticed immediately. So did the engineers. One of them looked down at his instruments with visible surprise. "Her neurological stress readings just dropped by nearly 40%, he murmured. No one celebrated. No applause echoed across the station. The discovery felt too important for noise. The plaza remained filled with ordinary life. Families hurried toward evening departures. Vendors closed their shops. Cleaning drones quietly polished the walkways beneath the fading light. Life continued exactly as it always had. Only now, a few people walking past the containment field slowed for reasons other than fear. Some looked at Lyra with curiosity instead of suspicion. Others simply nodded politely before continuing on their way. It was a small change, but every meaningful change usually began that way. Ethan picked up the untouched paper bag that still rested beside the barrier. He smiled as he held it toward the control panel. One of the engineers understood immediately, disabled a small service hatch built into the field, and nodded. "Go ahead." Ethan slid the bag through the opening. Lyra accepted it carefully with both hands. She looked down at the simple meal for a long moment before meeting his eyes once again. "Why did you stop?" she asked quietly. Ethan looked around the immense station one last time. At the lights, the machines, the thousands of ordinary people who had unknowingly shared the same space with her all day. Then he smiled. "Because every machine I have ever repaired taught me the same lesson." Lyra waited. "The loudest warning is not always where the real problem is." She smiled, and this time the expression remained. It was quiet, genuine, unafraid. Ethan finally glanced at his wrist communicator. His maintenance appointment had expired hours ago. He slipped the device back into his pocket without regret. Another job would always appear tomorrow. Another broken machine would always need fixing. But as he walked away beneath the stars shining beyond the station ceiling, he realized that sometimes the most important repair had nothing to do with engines, circuits, or power grids. Sometimes it began the moment one ordinary person chose to look past fear and see another person waiting quietly to be understood.